Shall I start talking now?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
You are.
Yes.
There's two different configurations of the listening enclosure. At the moment it's set up for listening, and then I reconfigure it for working. So I actually work in there, put a workstation in there, and I can change it around in about 5 minutes. So shall we
Yes, please.
do a tour?
Yes.
Okay. So basically it began as a stereo space. That's why it's too narrow, really. And then about 2000, I started working on a piece called Birth Circle. And the performance model of that was a crowd of people surrounding the listener. And we had a DigiDesign 8-channel 888 interface at the university. And I realised that I could use that to establish my circle of people. So I swapped my my Digi 001 for the 888 because we weren't using the 8 channels at the university anyway. And that began the 8-channel thing. Then I went to cache converters and the dump and various other places and got little passive monitors to hang above the main monitors. Each one of them is pretty well identically above, slightly in, because I wanted to raise the mid to high frequencies, so that, but the same signal came out of both. So it was still 8-channel, but with reinforcement, coloured reinforcement around the top. And I found one of the really interesting things was if I filtered the sound from the bottom up, in other words, remove the low frequencies, then the sound just imperceptibly raised, because these weren't responding to the low frequencies anyway. And when they cut from the bottom, there was a very natural, organic move. High frequencies are light and they float. Low frequencies are heavy and they sink. And then I managed to procure another 888, so the upper 8 became independent. And then I managed to procure another one, and so I established the internal array for another specific piece, a piece called Visible Voices, and that's why I got the third array, because I realised I wanted to have speakers just beyond arm's reach, but invisible to the listener, and that's what happens inside here. But they're placed asymmetrically in various distances close to the listener. So there's another 8 in here, one behind, one above, another 6 around. And then, because there's an extra output on the motor interface, I've instituted a couple of neophones. And that's been the setup for the last, 4 or 5 works. And that's been very, very interesting to get to know the instrument, basically. I made a decision very, very early that I wasn't going to change the configuration. I wasn't going to think up a new configuration for each new piece, because that meant I'd have to put things back again to play back the previous one. I thought it's much easier if I leave the instrument the way it is, get to know it, how it behaves. And so that's what I've done. So the works have become more and more instrument specific all the time, right down to favourite enclosures. Bit like, a good viola player in an orchestra. You give him something special to do. Very similar, actually. In fact, the whole spatialisation thing is very like orchestration. It's very, very interesting. And when you start thinking orchestrally right from the very beginning of the work, that's a really good sign. And it's started to happen now. It becomes almost innate and natural. Which array and in which way, how am I going to place a particular idea? So that's the way it grew, and particularly over the last 10 years or so, since 2003 when I left the university. But that's another story, we can get on to that. So do you want to have just a traipse around?
Yes.
And look at the monitors?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the bottom array, various sized genetics. there are the 1038s here, which are the main monitors. And this is why I don't use low frequency effect speakers. I just these plus these I think they're 8050s, which have a quite accented bass response, which I could fix, but I don't want to. These and these together take me right down as far as I need to go. So those are the two big beasts. And then we come round again here. Minimum distance from the sweet spot to the speaker cone is at less than 3 meters, which is too close, really. Should be at least 3 meters, but there's nothing I can do about that. And then we've got the flying array, which you can see hover more or less over the same position, but higher up and slightly forward. And that works really well. And quite often still, even although they're independent, I'll put the same program through each, but I'll filter the top one or do something to it and then slightly delay it so that you get a sense of depth, which is really, really interesting. If you take a mono signal and put it through speakers, then delay one slightly, you'll get a stereo effect. Well, it's similar. If you try and then mix that down to stereo, you get comb filtering effects, all sorts of crap. So, but it certainly works in this configuration. So it's not really spatial trajectory I'm interested in. It's depth of image. That's what's really important. Also the space. I mean the acoustic in here it's a bit roomy, but basically it's perfect. It's alert, but it's not reverberant, and that's because all the junk that's around and these drapes actually just hold the sound and specify the source a bit more. Now the difficult bit is getting inside here. So here we have the listening seat here. People walk in here, they hop up on that step and they sit here. And inside we've got, I've lit these monitors as they're lit for this visible voices piece, but there are, I don't know if you can see them with your camera here. Is this torch useful? You probably doesn't know.
Yes,
It is?
Yep.
Okay. So we've got a stereo pair here. We've got another 2 here. Got another 2 over here. We've got a Genelec behind. We've got one up the top there, just behind the light. You probably can't see it. No, you can't. You could if I turned the light out. And we've got the 2 neophones here and here. So when
Sorry, can you explain what a neophone is?
a neophone,
Yeah.
it's just
near.
near.
Oh, near.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you said near.
just like a headphone, except there is an airspace between the membrane and your ear, so it's not binaural.
Mm.
So it allows the ear to mix. And I'm really hot on that. I just hate binaural listening. It just drives me mad. I don't care what kind of effects you can generate. I think you need the acoustic space as the instrument. It's just crucial. And the way in which the sounds mix after they've left the loudspeaker is really, really important. And so they can be quite rough if you get really close to them, but you get back the proper distance, just like with a painting. A Turner, for example, you get too close, all you see is brush strokes. You get back the critical distance and bang, everything mixes retinally. Same principle. But it really means that it makes it terribly difficult to translate it into anything else without totally, completely redoing everything. So inside this, and the enclosure here really is to remove the clutter of the studio visually, but it also functions as a baffle as well. And then I make another little room inside the room that a person sits in. So they can't see any loudspeaker enclosures at all. They can't anyway, because when the lights are out, this place is completely black. But with this particular work, I've lit, it's called Visible Voices, because these 6 enclosures are visible. And they function as characters in a scenario. But it's the only work where anything is lit. And then through here, if you sit in the seat, I don't know whether you want to walk through there or not. So you go through here. I don't know whether you can see anything or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I can see.
And then through the aperture there is an LCD screen. So I quite often use images, more and more actually. And the nice thing about the enclosure is there's all the spill from the screen doesn't produce any clutter. You can't see anything. All you see is the screen. I really like that. So the whole dilemma of purely acousmatic or not becomes a really fascinating thing. And I sort of fight with that all the time. So this is the listening configuration. So that when individuals come, I bring them in here, sit them down, give them the spiel, give them a program, probably a glass of wine if they want one, and then they'll listen and then and leave. So that's the deal.
Great.
Yeah.
What sort of reactions do people have to this? This is a very unique listening experience.
Yeah. Or to be fair, I would say 90% of them lap it up. The less experienced people are, the better they react. Getting really highly specialised early music person, for example, and putting them in here, they can struggle sometimes, particularly with some of the images, but even just with the sound world, because it's just so far away from their training and expertise. They'll resist it. But someone who's got absolutely a clean slate, very few of them will react badly. 1 or 2 people just don't get it, you know. And they say, what are all those noises about? And that's the end of that, you know. But most of them need tissues by the time they've left, for all sorts of reasons. That's a very common response. People get upset. I think because they're alone and it's dark and they're forced inside and they connect the narratives with their own life experience. This is the feedback that I've got from people anyway. There have been about, I keep data on the visitors. Over 350 individuals have been through the place over a long period of time, 4 or 5 years. But there have been a fair number of people. So the general response is always pretty positive, really. Yeah. The other thing is it's really, there's no dough, no money or anything involved. And I made a decision about that quite a long time ago. Because, you know, obviously the things cost quite a bit to build. And I keep thinking, well, it should be earning some money. But it's just a stupid idea. And it completely wrecks the experience. Especially for me. What I get is another person's sensibility being impinged upon by what I've made. That's a huge gift for me. It's absolutely invaluable. Because it fulfills the communicative impulse that's in the work making. You think you're just making it for yourself. But, you know, you've got something really great that you've found. The impulse is, look what I've got, you know. So that's, and if someone's prepared to actually give me their sensibility in that way, that's a huge gift for me. And they get the experience. So it works well. And there's no obligation either way, you know. It's just below the radar, totally. And I've had various people come in here and said, you know, well, what happens to this work? You know, 1 or 2 people here, blah, 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 blah. And then one of them said, well, you're really lucky because if you don't want anybody to come, they don't. you don't need them to come to pay for the groceries, and when they do, it's a gift for you both. It's a perfect situation, really. Well, that's what I hang on to anyway. Yeah. So this work that we're going to have a wee look at is about a particular street in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, called Corriente Street. This is a photograph of it taken on a Sunday morning very early, not by me, by a friend of mine. But it's very, very uncharacteristically deserted. There's nobody there. Usually it's absolutely jam-packed, full of stuff. And it's based upon a tango, Tristeza de Corrientes, the sadness of Corriente Street. That's the name of the tango. But I've used the tango as a metaphor for the political tragedy that happened in Argentina and all of South America, actually, in Chile too, in the 70s and early 80s, when about 30,000 young activists were murdered by the junta. So the images are taken from the Park of Memories in Buenos Aires that has just been completed, which is about these disappearances, and also other images by a Argentinian artist called Carlos Alonso, whose daughter was one of those young people killed. So there's a series of layers of implications in this work. Ostensibly, it's just about the tango. The translation of the words street. I speak it anyway, so I don't need to say it again. And usually I'll put an explanation of some sort for people to read, or sometimes not. Just some sort of way of preparing them, getting them in some sort of mindset before they listen.
What sadness in your pale lights, your signs burdened by dreams, and your posters only cardboard laughter. Laughter that needs the courage of alcohol. Crying turned into songs of love for sale. Market of sad pleasures, a swap meet of caresses hanging on an illusion. Sad, yes, because you dream. Sad, yes, because you are ours.
Вначале я расскажу о рождении моего сына, поскольку он у меня самый первый. Это было в 1969 году, мне было 21 год, то есть я еще совсем был ребенком. First, my child, it's my son. Her name is Oleg. He was born the 3rd